Due diligence isn't just a topic for Germany, of course, or even just for the EU, or even just for the UK, despite Brexit. It's also for the rest of the world. So, for our next panel discussion, we'll be talking about global perspectives in ESG due diligence in value chains, and our distinguished panelists will build on some of those observations made as a result of amfori's engagement in the B20 discussion at the recent G20 meetings. So I would like to invite our distinguished panelists onto the stage here. We have...
Not so much on that, but let me kind of step in over here, if I may. And with that, I would actually like to say good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. I actually would love to talk to you a bit before we actually go up onto the stage and go into a bit of discussion, but maybe we talk a bit amongst us first. So, as Tristan already very kindly introduced the topic of the panel, Global Perspectives on ESG Due Diligence in Value Chains, I have a question for everybody. What is ESG? Who understands ESG? Some very simple but very complex letters out there. So what is ESG? Any inputs? Please be comfortable to raise your hand and, tell me what you think ESG really is all about. Really? Okay. I would maybe just come to you with the mic if it's okay. Do you have a perspective on ESG?
I think I do, and I should. It's a shared responsibility, as the previous actually from the previous speech, and it's a shared responsibility for business advancement and also protection of the planet. With people, despite the people, with people, and also protection of environment. So it's a whole package. We should really take the whole package, not leave one out of the package.
Wow, thank you so much. There were some really profound thoughts there. Whole package, ESG, just for everyone that did not get it. E for environment, S for social, and G for governance. So the whole package, all of it important, but also business advancement, extremely important for business advancement. How about some thoughts on due diligence? Does anybody have something to add, to define, and to share? What is due diligence to you? Okay.
Yeah, okay. In the introductory, we just heard also it is a management process, but I think probably this is, let's say, the business talk, and maybe I think it is acting reasonably and responsibly towards challenges that you see on a daily level. So, and I think this is, where everyone can appeal to. So, of course, it's a management process because it's not that easy, and you have to cover, and you also have to report, so that you need to deliver somewhere. And of course, authorities are coming up, and we are departing from voluntary due diligence to mandatory due diligence. And this, I think, this defines a lot of workload on the desks of our members, I think.
That's true. Well, thanks a lot for that perspective. Changing, evolving landscape, movement from voluntary to mandatory environment, management systems, implementation beyond Europe. Yeah, so it's not just about due diligence in Europe, but today it's really global. It's all over. How does it impact the world? How does it impact workers around the world? And let's maybe get some perspective on that from our dear panelists who have very kindly joined us in. And with this, I would actually love to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Gunther Berger. If I may invite Mr. Berger to join on the stage and to give all of you some perspective. He's the Managing Director, Directorate of SDG, Innovation and Economic Transformation, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO. And as Managing Director, Mr. Berger is heading the Directorate for SDG Innovation and Economic Transformation, responsible for the development of innovative services in areas of agro-industry, sustainability standards, fair production, and climate-improving technologies, and the development of innovative technical cooperation concepts, identification of new sources of finance and partnership. And thank you so much. And hereafter, I would love to introduce Mr. Thorsten Metz, joining us from the GIZ, Head of Initiative for Global Solidarity. Thank you so much, Thorsten, for joining us this afternoon. And as a labor market economist, Mr. Metz has focused throughout his career on the nexus of private sector development and social and labor standards. Working in various countries such as Indonesia, Thailand, Japan, and Myanmar, Mr. Metz supports the agenda of decent jobs and engaging with the private sector in developing sustainable business practices. So we have a lot of experience on the panel as it's building up. And of course, I would love to introduce Miss Linda Kromjong, amfori President, a known face to all of you. And of course, Linda in her past has been the Global Labor and Human Rights Director at Samsung Electronics, as well as the Secretary General at the International Organization of Employees, IOE. Also joining us virtually, we do have Madhulika Sharma. Ms. Madhulika Sharma joins us from ITC Limited, and I'm actually looking for her, and she will be with us in a moment. It does take a long time to come from India. So this is, of course, there she is. Welcome so much, Madhulika, and thank you for joining us this afternoon, rather evening in India. Some perspective, she's the Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at ITC Limited. 30+ years of work experience, 29 years in Tata Steel, where she has worked across various functions, including working as Executive Officer to the Managing Director and Chief Corporate Sustainability. And she decided to then join ITC as the CSO in December 21. Passionate about sustainability, she's committed to the integration of sustainability into all functions of business, and her areas of specific interest are climate change and mitigation actions for transition and adaptation, adoption of diversity and inclusion at workplace, amongst others. So we do have now the full panel for all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Small introduction, I'm Natasha Majumdar, the network representative for amfori in India. Also joining you all the way from Mumbai, and very happy to be here. With this, I would actually love to speak to our panel now. And thank you. I do have all of you joining us and I do have quite a bit of perspective that I'd like us to share with the audience today. So maybe, Linda, allow me to start with you, if that's good. And in that regard, I do want to maybe touch a bit upon amfori's role at the G20 and B20. So amfori did play a key role into the inputs of the G20, B20 process under India's presidency. And in that regard, Linda, you were the co-chair for the ESG in Business Action Council. And we also had representatives in the task force for GVCs, which are global value chains for resilient global trade. So can you share with us some of the key and main takeaways from this process?
It was a pleasure being part of that G20 process. This year in India, India held the presidency, but of course the process was about all the 20 countries and many more who have been involved there. And the business community, which also consists of representatives from all those countries being part of the G20, gathered together to give their input towards governments, that help shape policy worldwide. With regards to our role, where we had the honor of co-chairing the ESG and Business Action Council, there were, you can focus on many things, but sometimes it's also better to prioritize in your advocacy efforts what you feel is most important. And that's what we did with the ESG in Business Action Council. We really focused on whatever we do, we need to have, needs to be pragmatic, it needs to be actionable, and it needs to have KPIs that can be measured where success is being met or maybe not. What we also continue to underline that is really crucial, and I also said that in my introduction, is capacity building. Capacity building on the ground about what ESG and due diligence is. And capacity building is not something that is only the responsibility of companies, it's a joint responsibility. It's a responsibility of companies and governments and educational institutes and collective schemes all together. So again here, collaboration is crucial. But without the capacity building, we will not be able to make progress. So in the legislation on these topics, capacity building should always have an important place to be held, to make progress really. What we also very much focused on is that ESG is not only about reporting. ESG needs to be underpinned by robust due diligence, and that also should include access to remedies as important elements for consideration in the ESG and Business Action Council. Natasha mentioned that we were also participating in the global value chains for resilience, global trade and environment. And of course, this comes from the angle that we at amfori always advocate for sustainable trade with purpose. So again, here we focused on a couple of things. Within trade, having, say, the right elements being included in trade agreements that really focus on sustainability. Sustainable trade is crucial, and they should focus, amongst others, on responsible and gender-responsive procurement, because we know there is many issues with women still worldwide. 50% of our population is women, but that's not equally representative, and they're very much still on the vulnerable groups, and they need special attention and focus, but also responsible recruitment, which again here also includes a focus on forced labor and modern slavery, but also on transparent supply chain communication. And this links back, was also, I think, in your response to my question or preview before about showing transparency what you do. And it's not about being perfect here. It's about showing what you're working on, but also showing where you failed or where there are issues and how you have overcome those. So these were our key inputs into that process, where, as I already said, it was a pleasure. There was a great team around it. So we would say food for thought for more.
Yeah, thanks so much, Linda. Definitely, I think the discussions were very engaging, and there's always more that can be built upon. Setting the foundation is kind of key with some of those messages. But maybe, Madhulika, I can turn to you on this, because there's quite a bit of perspective that you also have with insights to share. ITC Limited did co-chair the ESG and Business Action Council. And in that regard, perhaps, maybe you could shed some light on what is the response that businesses are having to the increased demand for greater ESG performance, and also, how does business, even outside of Europe, respond to this call, and what you see as opportunities and challenges in the evolving ESG landscape?
Thanks, Natasha, and thanks for inviting me to this esteemed, set of panelists, and where I can share my thoughts and also represent not only ITC, but one India, which recently chaired the G20 presidency, and our chairman, Mr. Sanjeev Puri, he was a co-chair for the ESG Action Council. So I think. How does the ESG landscape, how is it panning out outside, some of the developed economies? I think with sustainability becoming mainstream, largely because of stakeholders, expectation changing. So there's a push, obviously, from the investor, which continues to be the most important stakeholder. But now, with so much of awareness happening, with the events related to climate change also happening, with some of the social unrests also panning out, I think other stakeholders like community, like customers, have also started becoming very, very significant. And of course, regulator, which is a very important stakeholder here, has taken note of it. And they have been what was more of a voluntary space of reporting on ESG is now slowly becoming very, very mandated kind of a thing. In India also, there was a decade of business responsibility reporting by the top 1,000 listed companies. But it's been a year since SEBI, which is the market regulator in India, has mandated the responsibility reporting in terms of very, very codified, very quantitative, 100 plus KPIs, which are more or less aligned with the GRI reporting. And they have also now said that for the top 250 companies, listed companies, they have also come out with a core BRSR, which is along 9 attributes, and it's a subset of the larger BRSR with a mandate of reasonable assurance from next year onwards. So obviously, we see the same set of, movement or momentum around ESG becoming much more mainstreamed, and the reporting becoming much more mainstreamed, more push for transparency from all set of stakeholders, and regulators are hence taking note of it and making it mandated. And also there is now a process of assurance which is now getting attached, which was not there earlier. So this is on the landscape. What we see as a challenge, and then I'll talk about the opportunity. Challenge, of course, is, as a sustainability professional, we see that there is a, overburden, obviously, with the proliferation of standards happening. And for an organization like ITC, which is a conglomerate, which has, presence in the, across countries and also has, customers across the, and is a supplier to some of the global companies. I think it also becomes very, very difficult because in absence of a universal, process or universal set of disclosure requirements, it's an overburden for sustainability professionals like us in terms of providing all those disclosures. Most of my team's resources and time, it goes into giving those disclosures, providing those disclosures, not only to the regulators or the countries in which we operate, but also to the customers who are there in the different jurisdictions of the globe. So that's one key challenge. The other, I think, is in terms of, there being uniform KPIs or universal, KPIs, which says which is good, which is bad. I think there's an absence of that, and that also needs to, I think that was one of the recommendations made in the ESG Council of B20. And I think that's one key challenge. The other is, again, the verification process. So every, which standard or which process to follow in terms of the verification or the due diligence of the whatever you are reporting. I think these are some of the larger challenges which are there, which we think is becoming like a compliance overburden for larger organizations having footprints across the globe. This is the same for opportunity. I think there is an opportunity because if there is what recommendations came out from the ESG Action Council of B20, if they are put in force, actually, if they are implemented, then you will have some set of universal standards of disclosure across the globe. And then, it will also help in, actually having some of the finance flows to some of the underdeveloped economies where there is requirement for mitigating some of the grassroots challenges which are there. Because of an absence of, such kind of unified systems, I think it becomes very difficult for investors who are looking at the fund flows across the globe in terms of which is a good investment, which is a bad investment. I think that is an opportunity that I look at from this. So I'll stop at that and, wait for my turn in the next one.
Thanks so much, Madhulika. I don't know how many of you caught on, but it was so interesting to hear Madhulika, speak about some of the common aspects that, whether it is Europe or it's a country like India and perhaps many more across that are looking at, for example, reporting standards, mandatory reporting standards, but also stakeholders widening to community, customers, regulators, and they're becoming more and more increasingly important. Of course, you're seeing that trend here in Europe. But thanks, Madhulika, for sharing that that's, not just a European trend, but here is where we see things are going beyond. There is a global harmonious movement that's coming together. And of course, the need for transparency, which is a call just about everywhere. But, Gunther, there's something that Madhulika mentioned in here, when she was talking about challenges, and that was really with regards to perspectives from underdeveloped economies and their needs. And I don't know, what do you have to say about that? Is there work and support that you could share some perspective on?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, a member of this panel, and to see some old colleagues. I worked for more than 30 years for the German government in different ministries and different functions, and so I see a lot of friends from former days. Yeah. I don't want to be, we say, advocatus diaboli here in this round, but of course, this legislation, this improvements in the supply chains, of course, they affected people. I think about nearly 500 million people who work directly in supply chains, and most of them in our partner countries. And of course, in my previous position, Mr. Juncker mentioned was responsible for voluntary initiatives and also for example, for the first German state textile label, Reinhard, you know it. It was a very hard fight, and the Supply Chain Act. And of course, we all want to avoid child labor and slave-like circumstances. And so I think these are necessary steps, and the next necessary step is, of course, also the European legislation. But from my point of view and from the perspective of most of our partner countries, there was not enough involvement of our partner countries of the global south in all this discussion, and that is something what I want to mention here. There's a lot of uncertainty we hear about what is being discussed here in Europe, or was even already have passed, for example, with the German legislation. There are, and we had several discussions, and even last week in India we presented our white book on sustainability and supply chain. There was a lot of complaint that there was not enough consultation with our partner countries. And I think that is the most important fact, and that is something what I really want to discuss with you today is, in this panel and then afterwards in bilateral consultations, producers are often left alone at the beginning of the supply chain. And that's also what Madhulika, with, I think, overburdening explained. And so I think what we need is to work on these issues. And you know, that's a former, I think we can say, Roland, father of this German Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz. Mr. Müller is now DG at UNIDO, and of course he's with his heart on this issue, and so this issue of how to support our partner countries in implementing these rules. This is one of his key priorities. He has 3 priorities: food security, energy supply for all, and the third one is fair production. And so that is a new priority for our UNIDO organization. And we see our role, first of all, to raise voices and to lead discussions at the international and multilateral level to conduct multi-stakeholder dialogues. And so thanks once more. Thank you for this invitation and for my invitation to can discuss this with you. Then, of course, and that's the most important thing, we have to support governments, companies, and especially the SMEs in our partner countries at the beginning of the supply chain, that they are better informed about existing and upcoming regulations, and also to support them in standard setting and implementing these rules. And then Linda mentioned capacity building. That is also a very important point. We need training to ensure that higher standards could be implemented. So I think these are 3 areas where UNIDO starts to work. It's a new priority for us, that's right, we start to work, but we have 172 member states. We have about 90 offices in our partner countries. In our government board, there are both sides. There are the developed countries and the developing countries, and so I think it's a very good platform for discussion, but also to think how we could support the producers at the beginning of the supply chain in the best way.
Thank you so much, Gunther. I think so many important points, but 2, especially even for all those globally watching this stream live, is the fact that voices from all over are important and need to be included in the consultation. Global South, Global North, I mean, it's more about bringing in the value and the perspectives from everywhere, because if we want real implementation, we need to address the real challenges. Also on ground, and really factoring in the producer's voice. This is not a one-way dialogue. It's not a one-way street. It does require that 2-way dialogue and inclusion. So thank you so much for highlighting that. I think that also addresses many elephants that tend to walk into rooms because that is a demand and a call also that we hear much from different parts of the world. Thorsten, really turning to you really quickly on that. How can GIZ facilitate due diligence between trading partners in different geographical regions? And what are your observations and learnings? Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. And also really thank you to Linda Amfori for inviting us and representing GIZ here at this conference. Indeed, a lot of interesting points already made. I'd like to perhaps start with a notion on really, as you just said, Natasha, getting involved in creating a common understanding on due diligence. I love the question you posed earlier, what is the difference between ESG and due diligence? And actually that already shows how much understanding is there for due diligence. In your actual conference title, you circumvented that question by just putting it together. And this is really the tricky part. Yeah. So what exactly is due diligence about? And this is something we believe, and this is where IGS on behalf of the Ministry of Economic Development is engaging on, is trying to break some of the myth and communicating with stakeholders in partner countries. Just as a notion, now, for instance, it is always communicated there's a new set of rules, a new set of expectations coming up, but factually it isn't. It literally is already what's been in place since many years. And this is something, in understanding already, we need to push a little bit further. There are international frameworks that just have been translated into regulation, legislation, but there's literally nothing new in there, and a lot of the partner countries already signed up with the ILO convention, etc. It's rather a question of implementation. And this is really where we have to start, and this is where Mr. Bega is right, talking to the policymakers on partner countries level. So this is some of the, say, things I believe we need to break down. There was also an interesting survey just recently done by the German Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Before the German Act was actually enacted, there was a lot of lobbying going on and concerns. Now we have to withdraw from all the countries in the global south, etc. And the survey posed the question to its members, how do you believe that you actually have to withdraw from one of your sourcing countries? And actually 7% said, yes, we probably have to. alternate, this means 93% are very confident that they don't have to. The other 7% may have to check a little bit their norms, why they have been already sourcing in the knowledge of breaking of certain human rights, but it's actually their role in that moment to check, and this is where diligence actually comes in. What can we do to change that working with our partners and not withdrawing? And this is the little tricky, or one of the messages we really have to push, and where also initiatives like amfori and others really come into play. Yeah, providing options, how to address actually this risk rather than just saying, okay, the supplier doesn't work for us anymore. And one of the aspects we've been noticing at IGS and we're really trying to push is looking into responsible purchasing practices. Mr. Juncker pointed out that already as a management practice now, offices of sustainability practices as well as also purchasing practices are moving together. We do see that in a lot of the large companies, and it's the truth. However, a lot of the other companies may have to still look into the connectivity, because responsible purchasing practices, in our opinion, the key element, I must say. Yeah, because it translates business relations into actual contractual relations, how it is sourced. And this ultimately matters. So looking into purchasing is really the key, and also looking into combining that. We as IGS, we have been supporting this process. So for instance, in the textile sector, there's a common framework for purchasing practices, you may know it. We've been working on with a so-called learning and implementation community of large brands together with their suppliers to discuss responsible purchasing, what it actually means for the suppliers, looking into order structures, into lead times, really the core of what makes and translates actually the business practice. And this is really, in my opinion, the forums we need to further push, where actually the engagement starts to matter also for the suppliers, and where they can also raise their voice. For instance, the Sustainability Terms of Trade Initiative, they formulated a white paper. This is the supplier's perspective in textiles from 14 countries, where they really laid out, this is how we experience purchasing. These are the things we would suggest to amend and change. You know? Based on that, IGS released so-called model contract clauses just recently for the textile sector, and we're emulating the same now for the electronics sector together with the Responsible Business Alliance, but also other sectors, industries, with the Ethical Trade Initiative, because we try to push that. Now last point, if it's okay, Natasha. Please allow me to address the aspect of direct engagement. Obviously, this is a key to really open doors for partner countries, because their perception, they see this regulation, and our colleague from LTC just pointed it out, they see it as another set of regulation they have to adhere to. But for them, obviously, and this is again where the myth breakings take in, we have to make them understand that this is not so much a new set of rules, but actually looking into rather where they are already compliant and where they aren't. And this is, I think, also a role where multi-stakeholder initiatives or industry initiatives play a key role, because say the front-runner suppliers, they already have 20 or 30 certificates. It's sometimes actually quite crazy, I must say. Yeah, if you go to a textile factory in Vietnam, which is one of the, say, pretty ones, it's amazing what they plaster on the walls and how many certificates they actually already fulfill. And here's, I believe, the role of MSIs, first of all, to break it down, what is the expectation, and secondly, also looking a little bit into harmonization of standards and certification. This is an important aspect as well. amfori is engaging in it, for instance, in the CARI platform, with a number of other initiatives, and this is something I'd also really hope other initiatives would pick up, because it's an important step as well. Last point to make, us as IGS on behalf of the ministry are implementing a so-called Responsible Business Help Desk network in 8 countries at the moment. This network is based with business association in the partner countries, and based on their needs of the members, we formulate services we provide to their members, but also to a larger scale audience, other stakeholders like civil society, unions, looking into really their needs. And reporting is something that's coming up frequently, because they see it is coming up, but there's also very simple forms of information required, really breaking down the issues, but also dialoguing on the very subject we're discussing here. I'll leave it with that. Thanks.
Thanks, Torsten. And really to summarize over there, I think 2 points, of course, many that you highlighted, but not new. Okay, so the foundations remain as they are, and they have been defined now more than a decade ago, whether it's with the UN guiding principles, with the various ILO conventions, or the OECD guidelines for responsible business conduct, even the most recent updated ones. So let's not complicate things. Let's go back to the foundations, keep it simple, whichever part of the world we're in. It's not reinventing the wheel, but it's building upon what we have. And direct engagement, you know, like you said, that is so important. It's got to be more consultative. I do want to give a minute to, you know, our panelists here to perhaps add a few comments if you want to or would like to, based on what you've heard so far in our discussions. So over to you guys if there's something.
Yeah, thank you very much. Only one point to Torsten. I learned that you have now, what I understand, eight more or less, let me say, what was it, offices, something like that, supporting the help desk in partner countries. I think that's a very important point, I know in my former responsibility, we organized this help desk here in Berlin, and that's of course good that our German companies or companies who are working in Germany, that they are supported in implementation rules. And but I think more important is it to do it on site, and so it's a very good development.
Thanks for that. Anything, Torsten, from you that you'd like to add?
But I wanted to say it later, but I can say it now. Make from 8 to 50. That would be great.
Well, then let me briefly reply. Thanks so much, and we would love to, and we do seek to expand at the moment. Those 8 countries are key countries we understand are major supplier countries to Europe. Obviously, though, there is a need to also expand that network for sure. I just perhaps one notion in terms of the direct engagement. I do see here also a role for UNIDO, obviously, because you're an intermediary between international organization and say the international level and directing it to partner governments. Translating this aspect, and I was just wondering, perhaps Mr. Beger, you can give a pointer on that, how you see UNIDO's role in this regard.
Should I? Okay, good. I think that was it's a good question, of course, and no 3 minutes promotion for UNIDO. I think. When we ask who, I think this is also something what I understand we want to discuss here today is who will pay for higher standards. That is a good question. Who will pay? And we had a lot of discussion, Reinhard, when we are discussing this with German companies and associations who will pay, and more or less all surveys and all reports I have seen is that the consumer is he's not ready to pay for higher standards. And what we try to avoid is, of course, that the higher cost are passed on the producers on the beginning of the supply chain. This is something that's a very, very important point. And we as UNIDO, coming back to your question, is first of all, we are the because perhaps not only everyone knows in this room what is UNIDO. UNIDO, this is an acronym for United Nations Industrial Development Organization. So we work very close together with companies, and this is very important also if we discuss how to share the implementation of higher requirements in the supply chain on sites. That's very important to work with companies. And for example, we have one common initiative, one partnership is with the automotive industry in Morocco, for example. This is something what we are implementing with GIZ. But we have other good examples, for example, in the coffee sector, a very problematic sector, for example, with Illy and Lavazza, or with Rittersport and the cacao production is also very, very important. And it's always support to ensure implementation of higher standards, and I think these partnerships are very important. That brings me to the second topic, and that is training, what you say, capacity building on site employees, so that they are more or less have the, they are able to implement regulations, appropriate regulations. And I already mentioned that in many places there's still a lack of knowledge about the new regulation and the expected one, and so that is also very, very important. And the third one, and this is more or less also a core competency of UNIDO, is all we do to create more added value in our partner countries. That is very important, because higher value creation locally in producing countries generates more added value in a greater price margin, of course, that remains there are higher incomes in our partner countries. And I think that is also important. This will also lead to better qualified jobs and also to better paid jobs. And last but not least, and that is also something we have to think about, is improvements of the supply chains need support of investments very often. So if you improve labor safety or environmental protection, you need investments, and that is also something we have to discuss, and that is of course something for the international financial institutions to provide appropriate financing mechanism. And this is something where UNIDO is working together with international financial institutions, because we have many years of experience in building quality infrastructure, but also in modernizing, for example, industrial parks, agro-processing parks. So that is perhaps little bucket of that what we can offer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And maybe with that, I'll turn to all of you, and also to ensure that you are actively engaging with us in this session. So we do have a question for you, and you will have this question already presented to you in the format. And really that question over here is, what are the challenges that you are facing in implementing ESG? So give us some perspective in really quickly, in the next few seconds to a minute. What are the top challenges that you face in implementing ESG? Use that QR code, and I will be seeing your answers as they come in, so that we can actually share them a bit.
I see a lot of phones up right now.
Yeah. Hang on.
Okay.
Oh, did that auto close? Yes, I'm so sorry. We will need help on that because I do see that there are more than 100 of you actually actively trying to respond. So yeah, we'll bring it back up. Reopen it? Okay. Okay, a few more seconds whilst we wait for that. Maybe Linda, if you had a comment on some of the observations, really quickly in a nutshell.
Okay, so it's about entertaining you whilst you are going to respond to the questions here. Well, maybe one observation here that I'm pretty sure that at the end of this conference, everyone will be able to pronounce Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz, because that's a word that you will probably hear more often here. So also for those non-Germans. No, I think for me, one key thing is that I really took away from the conversation we had here earlier is about dialogue. It's about including the suppliers in that dialogue. It's about including countries in that dialogue, because otherwise we will not make any change here. And I very much like the help desk, but if I have one wish, 50 countries, no, even more, that would be nice. But also that those help desks are not a scattered effort, that they're all driving in the same direction, that we're not ending up with multiple help desks per country, because that's not going to be, say, resource efficient here. So that's more a wish I have. Is it up and running? Yay! Okay,
Yes,
good.
Okay, that's a celebration. So everybody. Oh, that's great.
Yep, popping up now. And you can see 1 minute left. So there's a time challenge here.
Fastest fingers first. Team, help us scroll to the next page. Okay, that's interesting. So there are really some challenges, some of which we've touched upon already, but some really interesting ones to see from all of you. Really also including getting in touch with civil society, you know, including in all voices over there. But also emphasis on E, not so much on S and G. Actually, that's something I really enjoy talking about because it is so true and it's something we're seeing across as a trend, actually. And that's why right at the outset, there was a lady that kindly defined ESG for us. And she said that it is important to have E, S, and G, all equal over there. So really some of these challenges, thank you for sharing them with us. I do want to open this panel to questions. So whilst we did have one for you, please be comfortable to have questions for us at the panel. And in that regard, if anybody does have a question, please raise your hand. We have colleagues that are around the room that will be very happy to come to you to take your question. Any questions around? Okay, whilst we wait for some of you to think about a question that you may have for the panel or not, allow me to actually turn to Madhulika, and if we could have Madhulika back on the stage, please, at the moment, joining us in all the way from India. Madhulika, I don't know if you can still hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Well, it will be great to listen to you over here. A question I have for you, Madhulika, and this was really also already highlighted by our panel over here, having voices from everywhere and perhaps the criticism that exists that there's not enough constructive engagement between trading countries as equal trading partners. So can you tell us a bit about how can we make sure that everyone plays their part in implementing ESG due diligence requirements?
Thanks, Natasha. I think it was very heartening to hear earlier Mr. Gunther and Thorsten talking about, inclusion. I think that's a very key word, especially when you are talking to someone who represents the, South of Asia, which is kind of a global South hub of the global South, so to say. And, Mr. Gunther talked about very important points and brought about that it is, not only about the due diligence and all the ESG requirements, etc. It's about training and capacity building of the supply chain partners, and also it requires investments and who's going to pay, and regulating the financial flows for the capacity and capability building training of supply chain partners who could be across the world, and also some of them can be coming from a not so developed economy. Now that was very, very heartening to hear in this forum. Now coming to, are there trade parities because of these disclosures now getting mandated? I think since I represent Global South, I'll bring in my perspective that somewhere because of these are being created by developing economies and some of the rating agencies who regulate the financial flows in the global financial flows. What happens is that they pick up these standards which actually miss the local context. And I'll give you two examples from Indian or even a South Asian perspective. There is like India has made a commitment. Their NDC says that a carbon neutrality will be achieved by 2070. So India has defined its glide path, which is up to 2070, which means that the Indian grid, which is supplying electricity, will have a glide path for becoming net neutral by 2070. Now, if countries operating in India are supply chain partners to global customers, then they, it becomes very uncompetitive, or it's just not possible for them to generate electricity, or when they are connected to a grid which has its own glide path. So this is one, local context which gets missed when, you have, on carbon, you have these frameworks or guidelines or standards like SBTI, which says by 2030 and by 2050, these are two key dates, right? So this is one framework. The other I just wanted to give as an example is that for the developing economies, the social, the S actually, unlike the developed economies, the S is more about community. And India actually mandates a CSR fund spend. 2% of your profit has to be spent on the local community development, which includes education, which includes livelihood generation. So if you see these organizations are actually on the S side, they are spending much more than the developed economies on the social inclusion part, which just does not get reflected in any of the standards which has come from the developed economies. But they are actually doing some grassroots work for inclusion, for creating inclusion, but that doesn't get reflected in any of these standards. So I think I go back to my initial point on there has to be a harmonization, but with a social context and a local context in a place, and having taken that and then creating these harmonized global standards for disclosures for supply chain, whether it's supply chain or whether it is for your larger organization. So I think that is as of now, it creates a dissonance in the trading partners because I think if you just take a garment sector as a thing, so most of your exporters are in, say, Bangladesh or in in
Thanks,
Sri
Madhulika.
Lanka.
Maybe if you could just, sorry to come in here, but we do have a question popping up from the audience. So
Sure.
really
So I just
quickly in
wanted to make this
summarizing.
point that, yeah, there is a need for creating some kind of a local contextualization when you are creating those, standards and
Thank you so much.
frameworks.
So local contextualization, an important point over there. Tristan, do we have a question coming in?
Which traditionally meant corporate governance. What does it mean for us now, the G in ESG? Because it probably doesn't mean traditional corporate governance.
Excellent question, Linda. I can see you already reaching out. So over to you, and for our other panelists also, if you'd like to chime in later.
Good governance from a company perspective starts with setting in place your ambition, translating that into good policies and procedures, making sure that you also have mechanisms in place that help you adjust if and when needed. And part of good governance is also that you have mechanisms in place where people can raise their concerns. That's what we would call a grievance mechanism. And good governance means that you have a plan in place, bringing it back to supply chain due diligence, how you manage, how you conduct your supply chain due diligence. Where are your risks? What is your materiality, your double materiality? Where are you going to focus on? How are you going to do that? What will you do if an issue pops up that was not in focus of your priorities, but you still will need to deal with that? What is the process to manage that? What are the departments that are being included in that one, and how was that process go? And from good governance perspective, that's also embedded in the legislation, is that it needs to be at the highest level. Someone needs to be accountable, and there need to be measurable KPIs around that. So just trying to really put it in simple words, say from a company perspective, that's what it requires. And that's no different than if you had good governance in place for other important processes within a company.
Thanks so much. One more question at the back over there.
Thank you. This is Amanda from Amfori, and I have a question for Madhulika, actually, and thank you very much for mentioning the conflicting reporting requirements, and I think the point that this doesn't only come from Europe, but it's actually a global trend, which in principle it's a positive thing, but then we need to really think how to harmonize those. My question is, how do you see, how can companies, or how you in your experience are working with your team to optimize your resources to answer to those requirements, and how does that translate to your relationship with business partners in terms of the disclosure requirements that they receive from you and from other business partners? Thank you.
Over to you, Madhulika.
Thanks for this great question. I think just to give a context, so ITC is a conglomerate, but we have one legal entity, which makes it, we have to do across business consolidated disclosure. So one of the key enablers, so there is a conundrum of disclosures which is there, but one of the key enablers that ITC has been put up, and this is our 20th year of reporting. We do GRI-based reporting, and this was our 20th year, and we also do a reasonable assurance of most of our KPIs. But what helps is the early adoption of technology. I think the management of data across businesses and going to the, the last level of data origin, I think that really helps us in terms of if there's a new framework, then obviously the data, the base data remains same. It requires some more, reports, etc., to be generated, but then the base data remains same. And then we have taken us upon ourselves that we will do a reasonable assurance on a very, very high standard. So that also helps us in meeting some of these global standards. In terms of, we are finding, while we have been a pioneer in India in terms of reporting and transparency, but yes, we do find that we are overburdened with a lot of now more regional mandates coming. And since, as I said, we have customers across the world. We are now, I think, making it much more we are trying to create SOPs for our businesses in terms of what do they need to do, how do we need to up our ante on trying to say that what could be the risk and opportunities in terms of these evolving regulations. In fact, every quarter now we have started a scan of all the regulations that are upcoming, not only in India, but also globally, just to be prepared and just to be more agile on this. So I hope that has answered the question. But yes, it's something that I can speak about for next 2 hours, but I'll just keep it to that.
Thank you. So for many of you, Madhulika does have a lot of insight on that, but keyword there, agility, but also looking in for harmonization. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask our dear panelists for really one key word or one key slogan that you'd like to leave everybody with. So I start with you, Ms. Beggar.
Then I choose strengthening cooperation.
Strengthening cooperation. Mr. Thorsten.
It's a bit of a tough one, and I actually have more comments, but anyways, the one word would be interdependent. Oh God, okay, it's a long one. Thank you. Interdependence, simply because there is a relationship, it's a two-way road, work with the suppliers and the producers, and really see that there is a connection we all have to work on. Thanks.
Interdependence, and I did hear you have a few more comments. So ladies and gentlemen, please do reach out to Thorsten over the next coffee break. There is a lot of insight that he would have to share. Linda, your parting words.
Sustainability is an investment. Don't see it as a cost, but with a return on investment. And I think that's how we need to view it. And if I'm just going to take the floor here, being optimistic, just going to give you one example here, because I think there's really a lot of reason to be optimistic. When I was in India at a UNDP event, I was approached by students, and I asked them, and they did all different types of education. I asked them, is sustainability part of your curriculum? And they all said yes, different studies, part of the curriculum. And I think that's the future, and I think that's where it needs to start, to become as normal for any study, irrespective of the field you're working in. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Super. Madhulika, over to you.
Natasha, I'll take the opportunity to give 2 words. One is harmonization and the second one is inclusion. So I'll leave with these 2 words.
Super, thanks. And I'm going to add a couple over here, which we've already heard. Collaboration, 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 and capacity building. Yeah, there is nothing that replaces building skill and building knowledge on this front. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being an excellent audience and participant to this session, and look forward to speaking more to you over the coffee break.